right, let's do something a little different. For just a moment, I want you to forget everything you think you know about the legend. We're going somewhere else. We're actually stepping back in time, not just to look at a famous case, but to stand right in the middle of a specific atmospheric moment, a city completely shrouded in fog and absolutely gripped by fear. So come with me. We're going to London, 1888, but not the London you see in postcards, not the one with the grand palaces and all that. No, we're going to the East End. To be exact, a district called Whitechapel. And the first thing that hits you, it's not something you see, it's the smell. It's this thick, really foul cocktail of coal dust and smog that creates this dense fog they called a pea souper. And underneath all that, you get the stench from open sewers, the sharp tang from the slaughterhouses, and this sickly sweet smell of cheap gin everywhere. It's literally the smell of a city that is choking. So this is our setting. The streets are a total labyrinth of these narrow, twisting alleys. The gas lamps, they just flicker, casting these long dancing shadows that move with you. It's the perfect place for someone to hide, to watch, and to wait. 78,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's how many souls were crammed into this one district. The overcrowding was just suffocating. It created this community of strangers where, honestly, a person could just vanish and nobody would even notice they were gone. And the numbers here, they tell the whole brutal story. A laborer, if he was lucky, might earn maybe 6 to 12 shillings a week. But just basic food for his family, that could cost over 15. The math, it just didn't work. It was impossible. And this crushing, grinding desperation, well, that was the backdrop for everything that was about to happen. But here's the thing. Before we even get to the killer, we have to talk about the lives he completely overshadowed. These weren't just names on a list. They weren't just victims. They were women. Women with histories, families, and hopes that life had, slowly and very cruelly stamped out. Do you see the pattern here on this slide? It's heartbreaking. None of these women were born into this life. They all had a foothold at some point, a marriage, kids, a job. But then some crisis would hit, an addiction, the death of a husband, and they'd start this slow, agonizing slide right into the abyss of the East End, where society had absolutely no safety net to catch them. This is Mary Ann Nichols. Her friends called her Polly, and she wrote this really hopeful line in a letter to her father. You can feel it, right? She was trying to escape, trying to find some kind of stability. She'd found a job as a domestic servant, and she was full of optimism. But that hope, it was so tragically short-lived. The pull of her old life was just too strong, and pretty soon she found herself right back on the streets, needing just 4 pence. 4 pence. That's the price of a bed for the night in a lodging house, and she never found it. And then there was Annie Chapman. People called her Dark Annie. She was intelligent, industrious, but just haunted by family tragedy and her own addiction. And Elizabeth Stride, Long Liz, who came all the way from Sweden for a new life, but ended up so desperate for a little sympathy that she would invent these elaborate, sad stories just to survive day to day. And Catherine Eddowes. People who knew her described her as a jolly woman, always singing. Her last words were actually a cheerful goodnight to a policeman. And then finally, there was Mary Jane Kelly. She was the youngest, the most mysterious. Her past was this whole collection of unverified stories about a glamorous life, a really stark, sad contrast to her horrific end. So when the first body was found, it was horrifying. But in Whitechapel, it was just another tragic headline. That was about to change. That sense of general unease in the city was about to curdle into full-blown, citywide panic. Now this timeline, this shows a really clear and terrifying escalation. Just look at the progression. It starts with a brutal murder in August, but then an organ is taken in September. Then you get the double event on September 30th. He was probably interrupted with Elizabeth Stride, which is why he only slit her throat. And then, just an hour later, he finds Catherine Eddowes and unleashes all that frustrated rage. And it all leads to this horrific climax indoors with Mary Jane Kelly. He was getting more confident and a lot more brutal. And then, a letter arrived at a news agency. It was written in red ink, and the tone was just mocking, arrogant. At first, everyone dismissed it as a hoax, until a detail it mentioned, clipping the victim's ears, seemed to come true. And this letter, it gave the faceless, formless killer his legendary name, Jack the Ripper. The terror was just amplified when this little note arrived with a small box. Inside was half of a human kidney preserved in alcohol. The writer claimed he'd fried and eaten the other half, and Catherine Etowah's left kidney had been taken from her body. You know, the press didn't just report the news, they basically forged a monster. The real, probably pathetic murderer was completely lost. And in his place rose this legend of Jack the Ripper, a cunning, taunting phantom in a top hat and cloak, a character who would become immortal. The killings just stopped after November 1888. But the story? Oh, the story was far from over. So let's explore the impossible police hunt and the killer's bizarre, unintended legacy. Just imagine trying to solve this case today, but without any modern tools. No DNA, no fingerprinting. Crime scenes were trampled by crowds within minutes. You had two rival police forces who were competing, not cooperating. And on top of all that, a media frenzy creating this blizzard of false leads. They were literally hunting a ghost in the dark with their hands tied behind their backs. The list of suspects has grown to over 100 now, but these four, they represent the core fears of the entire Victorian era. Was he a respectable gentleman with a dark secret? A foreign emigrant bringing some madness from another land? A convicted poisoner? Or a quack doctor with twisted medical knowledge? And this right here, this quote brilliantly illustrates the great paradox of this whole thing. The murders were so sensational, so horrifying, that they forced wealthy London to finally confront the absolute horror of the poverty in its own backyard. The press, in its frenzy, exposed the slums to the entire world, and it actually led to real social reform. Slums were torn down, lighting was improved. A monster's actions accidentally exposed a monstrous social system. The legend? That belongs to Jack. But the story, the real story, that belongs to them. To Marianne Nichols, who wrote home with such hope just months before she died. To Annie Chapman, who was selling crocheted flowers on the street just to try and earn the 4 pence for her bed. To Elizabeth Stride, who was found with a small packet of breath mints still clutched in her hand. To Catherine Etowah, whose last words were that cheerful good night just minutes before she met her killer. And to Mary Jane Kelly, who was heard singing an old Irish ballad in her room just hours before she was silenced forever. You know, the fog of 1888 has long since lifted. But the real terror wasn't just the man. It was the darkness he revealed in the city, in the press, and in society itself. A darkness that may still linger, which really only leaves just one question for us, doesn't it?
And so, another chapter closes. For more journeys into history's forgotten files, please like and subscribe. Your next story awaits.